Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this stream. Today, I'm going to be taking you through the basic steps of building something in Reaktor. This is Reaktor 6, which I've just got, so you'll have to excuse me if there's one or two delays in the process. There are some differences, hopefully not too many differences at the level we're going to be working at, which is more of the primary level and the blocks level. At a later point, we will probably go into stuff like core, but right now, I don't understand all the differences to core. So it would be pretty foolish of me to try and implement what's going on there. It is quite different in core at the moment. Just 2 seconds. There we go. Just turn down the volume on the computer I got, which is monitoring this stream. Otherwise, we get all sorts of confusion. Okay, I'll move down to chat on that computer as well. Perfect. So today, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of the things you can do to make your life building instruments and effects in Reaktor much easier. And we're going to do some basic building of a very basic synthesizer so you can sort of get on and build Reaktor as you might wish to. Build instruments you can use in your tunes, build effects you can use in your tunes more easily. I'm going to start with synths. I find that slightly easier. So what I've done, I'll shut this down. I've got my voice channel here in Studio One. I've got a Reaktor 5 channel. I don't know why it's Reaktor 6. I'll rename that. Just to avert any confusion. Reaktor, no, caps. Reaktor 6. There we go. That'll do. And it's nice that I still have access to Reaktor 5, which I noticed because say I had a patch which somehow wasn't compatible between the two, I could still actually use that patch if it was a favorite of mine. I'm not blocked from using it. And on the Reaktor 6 channel, I have absolutely nothing. And it feeds through to this, my main out. So we'll go and open up Reaktor 6. And I'll start with a new ensemble. So we go straight from the beginning. No, don't change that. And this is what you'll get. This is just a massive window. I'll minimize it. This is another immediately really nice feature. Dynamic resizing within the host sequencer. So this is my Reaktor plugin. And I'm going to do it all in here so I get control over the microphone and broadcasting nice bits and pieces. But you can certainly run Reaktor as a standalone product. And in many ways, that's the best way to run it when you're developing a synth or instrument or effect, although it's much better than it used to be. But there we go. I just dynamically resized the window. I don't think I could do that in Reaktor 5. I could certainly resize the window, but not sort of through dragging it to exactly where I wanted it. And this is our new empty blank instrument. It's in edit mode, which is fantastic. So we can make changes to it. And I'm going to shut, this will be where all the knobs are displayed, all the sliders, all the faders, things like that. And this is where the structure of our instrument is. Now, right now, we have no knobs or faders or sliders because we haven't made any structure. So we're going to make structure. This is our inspector. So what's going on in here? If I click on a module, you see it changes. So plug in bus 1, channel 1, plug in bus channel 2. So this is the audio coming in from the sequencer to Reaktor, and it will do something to it, and it will go to these two outputs back into the sequencer. I'm going to move them over there. I'm going to shut the panel window, and now I just have the structure. So now we're going to come on to one of the things that will make your life a lot easier, which is absolutely not necessary that you do. And for me, this is a programming concept which is not really ever addressed within Reaktor. I think it's a complexity they wish to remove, but it certainly is a thing. And that is the concept of interrupts. So for me, it makes a lot more sense and it's a lot easier if everything which provides a hardware interrupt, it sounds complicated, but it isn't, I promise you. It just means something in some way in which the user has control over something. So like a knob or a slider or a fader or a MIDI keyboard or a mod wheel or a pitch bend, anything that you physically can affect within the computer is separated from any action you may take on the audio. So essentially, what that really comes down to is that all our MIDI and all our panel inputs are separate from our audio modulators. And that's very, very simple. I'm going to make a module. There we go. I'm being insane blind. All right, so we're going to make a macro. And within this macro is another blank area where we can build anything we like. We're going to put all our panel elements. So we're going to today build a very, very basic two oscillator synth. Something like a Pro 52. Now, you know, that's a very flexible design. I'm not saying we're going to go into all our mod wheel things and stuff like that, but certainly we're going to try and get some basic synthesizer controls on there. So the first thing that you will get from, the first thing that springs to mind immediately for me is that there's going to be two envelopes on that. So we need to get some knobs going. Two ADSR envelope areas. So I'm going to copy that and then I'm going to paste it. Hey, this is where it's better to be working in the standalone instrument because it has full access to keyboard shortcuts in a way that when you're running it as a virtual instrument, it doesn't. But we'll get around that. It's not a problem. I've got to say, this is literally the first time I've opened up the software. It really is. Particularly the fonts are a lot better done. I can see what I'm typing way better than I ever could. In Reaktor 5. So that's envelope 1. I'm going to copy that. Copy. I'm going to paste that. In fact, I'm not going to do that just yet. Delete. Now I want to jump back to the panel and I want to arrange these. And it's all within macro. I will sort that out later. I need to unlock the panel. How do I do that? Unlock panel. And that all looks much better than it ever used to in Reaktor 5. That's much, much tidier looking. I'm not saying pretty, I'm saying tidy. It's easier to read. It just works better. I'm going to rename that. So now it's very clear what it is in our layout, our structure. I'll jump around here to the view. I do want it to be visible. I don't want it to have a frame. That's the line around the outside, so you know. So if I click that on, I don't want that. Not really. I mean, this is going to be our entire panel. And that's that. What else could I have done? I could have removed the title, I believe. Yeah, just like that. So we don't want to do that. So I'll go back to none because this is going to be our entire panel. It's just a waste of space having a frame around the entire outside of it. It's not necessary. I'll jump back into this panel. I will copy that. But what you might want to do, okay, this could be useful. So I'll copy that. I'm going to make a new macro. And you can make individual frames for your boxes. So we'll call this amp envelope. This can make it much easier actually to work with your objects. I'll delete that as I no longer need them. And I'll now copy this. I'll paste that and I'll call that My typing is nasty. Filter envelope. I'll jump back around to the panel, which is still unlocked. I can just drag that. There we go. If I drag that one away, it moves the whole thing. There is a way around that. I'll demonstrate to you now, actually. So I want to try and drag the amp envelope because it's in the top left corner. The entire box size changes. That's really annoying. I don't like that. It makes it difficult to work with. So the way around that is to make a new macro. If I click on the macro, I can change that. I don't want it to be none. You see, so it's still there. It's doing nothing. It's just providing an easier way for me to manage the space. And you can also put one down in your bottom left, and then you have a panel to work with, essentially. It's much better. So I'd strongly recommend doing that. Okay, but for now, I'm just going to work with that. I'm not sure how big this whole synth panel is going to be. Probably not that big. We're not going to put in the bottom left panel yet. Not quite yet. So that I'm going to call, I'm going to put it right up there. I'm going to rename it space holder. So I know exactly what that is. That's like a little thing. I never bother with that. There's nothing in there. I'm just using it as a panel element. And roughly speaking, I try and keep these in the same order that you see them on the synth. So what else would we need on a basic to oscillate synth? Well, we got our amp envelope and we got our filter envelope. Should we rename that mod envelope? That makes a bit more sense. Mod the filter. We're certainly going to have a couple of oscillators. So I'll build another macro, osc1. And in there, I think you find we need one knob for the semitone pitch. We need another knob for fine control. And we need some way to establish waveform. So certainly, that's 2 knobs at least. Go. And we'll call that semi. Fine. And actually, do you know what? Personally, I actually really like an octave knob as well. I'll copy that and paste it again. Put that above. Okay, now with the octave knob, and in fact all these knobs, we need to control the range of them. We need to do that on other envelopes too, but Reaktor envelope timing is a little unusual, so I want to have a look at the module before I determine the range of the knobs. These ones, it's a lot easier because we're going to be going on mass we control. So octave function. I need to look at the min and max range. How we need to think how many octaves up and down, how many octaves down we want it to be able to go. So if I say I want it to be able to go 2 octaves up, and the minimum is 2 octaves down, so that's 5 octave range. I've got -2 octaves, -1 octaves, 0 octaves, +1 octaves, and +2 octaves. So I need to make sure our step size is 1. I'll jump back to the panel. Let's spread these out, and because at the moment we have all the numeric readouts of what our knob is, it's quite easy to test whether the output we're expecting from the knob is working correctly. So just for now, so I can test that I've set up my octave knob correctly and it's working as I expect it to, I'm going to lock the grid down. Test that. You see it snaps to the position I want it to, which is fantastic. So I'll unlock the grid again and move that around. Before I unlock it, I'll get all the other knobs set up. So semitone, I want that to have a maximum of 12 in one direction and -12 in the other direction. So that's an octave either way on my semitone knob. That seems to work well for me. On a step size of 0.1, You got to be careful because at the moment, this is to do with mouse resolution. At the moment, it can't focus down to the level I want. So I was holding down Shift for fine control, and it was moving 0.02, where I want it to be able to go down to 0.01. There we go. That's fine. So now I can access absolutely any value that I've ascribed it. And it still moves fast enough. Perfect. I'm happy with that. I jump back in here. Fine tune. I want this to have a semitone either way of the knob. Oh, 200. 200 will be fine. I'm very happy with that. That's all the control I want. Let's move these out. And you'll see that I don't actually need that. It's not giving me any more control than the semi knob, but it's a lot easier to work with, I think, when you're actually using the synth. So that's why I've put that in there. So we'll move that back into the position I want it to be in. Get this panel laid out. Well, actually, we'll put in the rest of the controls. So I need a switch. And there's a lot to be said about using switches, especially when you're trying to do a sort of virtual analog synth. We'll go into that at a slightly later point. And I don't like switches in Reaktor. So the pause there was I was thinking about how I'd use this switch at the audio level. And I know certainly in previous editions of Reaktor that's caused problems. So we'll find out what happens. Maybe it'll cause a crash. We shall see. There are ways to do it, but it's not particularly pleasant. So we'll call that oscillator mode or waveform. Waveform is better, isn't it? It's more explicit. Info. Function. And somewhere in here it will tell me how many ports I want to have. And I want to have, this is essentially how many oscillator waveforms I want it to have. So let's talk about it. I want to have a square wave. Not a square wave. I want to have a saw wave. I want to have a triangle wave. I want to have a sine wave. So that's definitely 3. And the decision really on a VA is how you do your square wave. Do you want it to be a pulse width, sort of a pulse wave with variable width, or do you want it to be a square wave and a 25% pulse wave and a 75? You get the idea. So let's fill these in, at least. I like to put saw and triangle together, as they're quite closely related waveforms. And I'm going to make it a pulse. And the implication of it being a pulse is that you'll be able to modify it some way. Which is okay, apart from the fact that it means you've got a knob which is typically of no use. And then for sine wave, I love sine waves. Crazy not to put one in. You see, it's looking for inputs, which it's not going to get because this is a panel thing and it's a problem I have with Reaktor, basically. Okay. So I'll jump around to the front, and here we go. It's created those for us. Unlock panel. Unlock the panel. Here we go. Let's fiddle around with that until we get the layout we want. I want octaves on the left, followed by semitones, followed by fine tune, my waveform. That looks about right. So I'll copy that. I'll paste that across. We'll call that oscillator 2. I'm not going to go for a third oscillator. I do want filter controls though. I'll tell you what you can do actually. There is another little thing we could do in oscillator 2 just to keep the interest there. First of all, I'll move it down. I'll move that out slightly because we're going to put in a toggle switch. I'm going to call that sync. Whoa. I'll jump into behavior here. On value 1, off value 0. On default to be off. Perfect. You know, you can do all sorts of things with buttons. So if I set it to trigger mode, then the button I make on the panel here, okay, you can change the size of it and you can make it into a drum pad. So it'd be something you hit, back into view. Oh, I was on the right thing. I could open an image and I can make something look like a Akai drum pad. And every time I clicked on it, it would send a trigger to a drum sampler. And it would feel like you're hitting a drum sample. It would be fantastic. So that's our oscillator 2 section. And so at the moment, what we're really doing, we're almost making a design document, a very specific thing. We're sort of saying, I want this knob on the front. We're not saying what the function, we're not saying how the function will work. We're saying what functionality we want from the synth. And we're going to build this all up. And then we're going to think about how I take the output from these knobs and send them off to the audio structure to do the work that we want it to do. So we're leading from what we want. We're not just diving in and hacking away and seeing what we can get. So it's a much more structured way of building. And it's much more easy, it's much easier to know when you've finished building your synthesizer. That way. I've built a few synths in my time, and the enemy, the overriding enemy you will have at some point is feature creep. You think, you'll discover something new and interesting, and you think, yeah, I'll put that into the synth I'm building now. What will happen is you won't finish any of them. You'll never really finish the feature because you'll discover a problem with it along the way, and you'll never really finish the synth because there's always something else you can be putting in. So my overriding advice would be build your panel, decide what you want it to do, and then build the features behind the panel. And if you come up with something fantastic, that's great. Put it in your next synth. Finish what you're building. So the next thing I want is a filter panel. Dum dum dum. Get the idea, it's fairly repetitive. Filter. On the filter, we're going to want more knobs. We're going to want a cutoff knob. Cancel. That is the problem with building it using it as a plugin, is that the sequencer, if you're not very, very careful, the sequencer will grab your key input and start modifying things behind without you realizing what it's doing. You really got to pay attention, especially if you're doing a live stream. Terrifying. Just check I haven't managed to break the microphone. Yeah, everything looks good. Okay, cool. So I want a cutoff knob. I want a resonance knob. What am I doing? I'll call that res. No one uses it. I want an envelope knob. There we go. So that's pretty much it. Let's get the that sorted and in a better position. And I'll lock that. Oh, there we go. That's what I was looking for all this time. Fantastic. That's a nice little touch. Now I know about it. Don't know what that does. Let's leave it alone for now. Anyway, and it's about now. We're going to talk about the ranging of these knobs here. Envelope, I like to keep that as a multiple. So I take this and I multiply it by 1. And if I do that, then it'll be exactly the same as it was. If I multiply it by -1, it'll be the inversion of what it was. And that's how I like to work with my envelope knob, to multiply between -1 and 1. So I'll go into function. That would be fine. Res, I like to keep between 0 and 1. By and large, the output of my audio, well, no, absolutely the output of your audio channel at the end, if I go into here, this output needs to be between -1 and 1. And that's kind of a big hint. By and large, unless you're working with something you want to be in the MIDI range, you'll have a much easier time of it if you keep these ranges between 0 and 1. Sustain, 0 and 1. It's just like a multiplier. It's really easy to work with and manipulate your signals if you keep them between 0 and 1. The exception to that is if you want to work on a logarithmic scale, or you're working with MIDI, which is in, I think it's a logarithmic scale. It's certainly not a linear scale, put it like that. And then I keep your ranges between 0 and 127. And you'll find that that is easy to work with too. So that now reads in MIDI notes. And we want to start thinking about whether we keep these display values on. I certainly do. Although you're seeing a lot of sense that they don't, but I don't see any benefit to that whatsoever. It just makes things worse. So we're going to leave that. Check everything is working. We're certainly going to be leaving the display values on. With these waveforms, I want to turn off the label. Get back a bit of space. That looks a little better. Unlock the panel again to respond to that. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'll save a little bit of space there. We're going to have a mixer as well. And in the mixer, we're going to have OSC1. OSC2. OSC3. Not OSC3. Talking nonsense. Noise. Unlock the panel. Cross. And that should be looking sort of, well, not right, but familiar at least. Okay. So that is essentially all the knobs we really want. to make a pretty powerful synth straight off the bat. We're not going to deal with the polymod section. We'll go into that at a later point. At the moment, we're just going to go into this section here. What we've got here, these functions. So I'll jump around to new. So I have my panel, and now I want to build my synth. And we're going to do the same thing again. We're not going to add directly, not straight away, because there's something we haven't done in here, which is deal with all our MIDI inputs. We're not going to deal with them straight away. We're going to build the structure of what we want the synth to be here, the audio architecture. So again, I'm going to build this I'm going to call audio. So I made a very clear distinction. I've got my panel section, I've got my audio section. That I'm going to change that to input section. That's clearer still because our MIDI will be in there too. And we need to think about whether we're working with an effect or an instrument here. And we're clearly working with an instrument. So if we're working with an effect, we put audio inputs here, which would allow us to feed the audio from the sequencer into the audio. So if we're making a delay, then this audio channel will be our left stream, and it will feed into our audio modulating section here. But we're not doing that. We're going to be generating audio in here. So first off, I'll build another macro. We'll call this OSC1. Jump into that. So now I'm in new, which is, we haven't saved this yet. We'll go into that in a second. Audio, OSC1. And we're just working with primary. And so now we need to select all our different oscillators. So we had 4 different waveforms, if you remember. We had saw wave. We had a, oh, I don't want the FM. We had a triangle wave. We had a pulse wave. And we had a sine wave. We want to be able to pick one of those, so we need a switch. Yeah, you see, I'm going back into the panel. This isn't a panel thing. This is actually a routing thing at this point. So we're going to try and do this complicated thing. Don't need any of the names. I'm going to bolt these together. And we need to put in our pitch elements. So I'm going to use, this might seem strange to you, but this is just how I work. I'm going to use an add. So I can get all my pitch elements in this one thing. And it's going to be 3 different pitch elements. It's going to be our octave switch, our semitone switch, and our fine switch. 2 of them I don't need to modify. They're perfect as they are. And 1 of them I do. They're going to go into the pitch. That's perfect. Some weird issues. Again, a very strange concept within Reaktor is that this needs to be, you need to set the amplitude of the oscillator from the back end, although it makes much more sense to do it from this side, the oscillator and the signal flow, but we'll go into that. So I'm going to set these all to 1, which is effectively full amplitude, as my range is between -1 and 1. I don't ever want it to exceed 1, unless I'm trying to distort it. So that's now at full volume output. And honestly, I can't imagine why you wouldn't ever want to have an oscillator at full volume output. Very strange to me. You could then change it there. I mean, you almost certainly will. Anyhow. And so basically, that is our architecture. There's nothing more to be said about that. and we need an output from that macro. That's an output. I'll rename that OSC1. I don't want that to be visible. Indeed, I don't want this macro to be visible. I'll jump back to the panel. Can I see any of that? I can see the audio macro. Okay. I don't want the audio macro to be. I'm going to jump down here. Copy that, and I'll paste it. I'll rename that oscillator 2. Technically, I could do a completely different oscillator in here. Oscillator 2 sends a sync signal. I'll jump to the panel. This sync signal is sent from oscillator 2. This is how I'm doing it anyway, into oscillator 1. That means that these don't need to be sync oscillators, and I can save myself a little CPU by not making these sync oscillators. But it'll be much slower, and I can't be bothered. So I'm not going to do that. So if I go back to my inputs, I want to get the inputs from here out into the oscillator controls. And that's certainly the way of doing it that was there. Go to properties, go to info. Zone terminal for internal connections. If the properties, it can be connected to one or more modules in the ensemble that receivers for internal connections. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to send octave. I'll call that OSC1. I'll give it unique identifier, OSC1O. That's bad unique identifier because O is ambivalent. It can look like a 0. OSC1 oct. That's fine. Copy that. No keyboard shortcuts makes things so much slower. OSC1 semi. I don't need a receive unit. Copy, paste. One fine. Fantastic. And now the switch doesn't work the same way. Because you know these are yellow cables, that means that's a data connection effectively, or a control connection. This is an output to audio. So we need to do this in a different way. I'm going to rename that waveform 1. So it's a unique identifier. I'm going to connect to it. I'm going to go back to my audio, jump into OSC1, let this switch. I'm going to call this waveform 1 out. One out. Jump back here. Input. Connect. Loss receive. So the two thing is flashing. Is that right? Oh, I hate this. That's right. So internal connection, waveform 1 out. Okay. So that's oscillator 1 connected up. Well, that bit connected up. I'll jump back into the audio. Now I need to get my connections. So this is going to be terminal IC receive. This is where I want my receives. Okay, that's not quite right. The output from this I need to times by 12. Get my octaves. This would be a good point to have a split screen, what I've just done there. So I'm going to jump in. Yeah, and I can save myself a lot of time here. So connect to from oscillate 1 octave. Oscillate 1 octave, that's sorted. Put in another terminal. And another one. And so you may think this is a lot of hassle for a basic synth, making it all separated, and it is. But if I was building a more complicated structure, and you will, then it makes a lot more sense. And suddenly, when you've got like a matrix going on, it makes a lot more sense to have your interface components separated out from your audio architecture. The more complicated your structure becomes, the more sense this approach makes. Send that to from semi. I'll rename that. Otherwise, it will get confused. Well, it won't get confused, but I certainly will. Same with that. Send that to from. And for the sake of ease, we're not going to tie up oscillator 2. That's an exercise in repetition we don't need to go into. I'll shut that secondary panel down. And that means we don't need to connect the mixer up straight away. We'll get the envelope, the amp envelope connected so we can actually get some sound and see whether everything's working as it should. Brainstorm, there we go. ADSR. Macro. Pull that amp on. We don't want it to be visible. So we need a MIDI gate to trigger that, which we haven't done yet. So I'll do that. There'll be MIDI inputs here. Well, there's box MIDI, and all our MIDI is going to go in here. For now, we just want gate. I'll make up a send receive on that terminal. IC send. Here we go. Back into the audio. Our amp env. IC receive. Now. If I create a control on this, you'll see the range they're expecting the knob to be used in. And it's really strange unless they've changed it. Function 80. So they use a logarithmic scaling on that. And what that means is that we need to times everything that comes in. And it's exactly the same. There's no more processor power. It's doing exactly the same thing. The inputs from our knob, we need to change be in the same range. Otherwise, this pre-made envelope will not function as we're expecting it to. But that's not a big deal. First of all, let's connect up the gate. So I'll click on the output gate. It's going to this input gate. Easy. Bang. There we go. That's that connected. Skip down out of that. I'll go into my AMP envelope controls. And I need terminals for all those. Send. Copy. Rename these sensibly. AMP attack. AMP gate. AMP sustain. AMP release. And the reason I'm being so cautious about that is that it allows me, if there's a problem with connection, be a bit more explicit about where the problem might be. So I can see more clearly what I've done. So AMP attack, I'll connect that to that unit there. So AMP attack goes there. And I'm going to do that with all these. You should be quite easy to misclick that. I mean, you'll pick it up soon enough, but it's certainly something that you want to pay attention to. And all of these, well, 3 of them need to be multiplied by 80. So I'll put up a constant. There's no point in having 3 variables, so that's just a waste of memory of 80. Or 3 constants. I just need the 1 constant. Multiply. I do need that 3 times. Cut that down to get back a bit of space. Back. Okay, goes in. Sustain is sensibly done. Change. And releases. You see, that's kind of complicated and kind of a mess. Imagine if you're trying to deal with the knobs as well. It starts in a more complicated structure. It starts becoming extremely difficult visually to see what you're doing. That's just a very simple envelope structure. So my advice would be that using these is definitely in your interest in the long run. And we need an output from that. That's all we need from that. It doesn't do anything more complicated than that. Terminal output. Call that amp. So scary. Okay, so let's check whether that's working. We can add some maths in here. So the output of the oscillator is now being multiplied by the output of the amp envelope. And that will hopefully result in go. That's a special unit. We'll go into that later. Terminal output. And we should be able to get sound out of that now, I think. Unless I've done something stupid. Hold on. So there's a problem with it, and that's something that you'll gradually realize is inevitable. That's working. I suspect the problem is that the switch isn't working correctly. Let's try that. And pitch isn't working correctly either. And that's because I haven't got MIDI input for that. Okay. So I jump down into the input. MIDI in, pitch, note pitch. End up I see send. Pitch. I see receive now. Interesting. Well, I've done something wrong there, so I need to investigate that. And rather than take up more time in this tutorial, I'm just going to plug note pitch in. Okay, so we've got audio out of our synth now. And large chunks of it does appear to be working correctly. Fantastic. So I'll stop play on that. Don't need any more audio. These IC stands, I've forgotten that they were visible. So we're going to turn them off. They've already all been arranged. Okay. And that would be why that wasn't working earlier. 2 seconds, so I'll jump back in. I'm going to remove that wire. The way of doing it is just to plug that back in. Jump onto the panel, click on a saw. Now hopefully that should work. That's working. So I'm going to need to look at the IC send of that. That's all good. This is going to be wrong. That needs to have a maximum range of 12 and minus 12. That's really weird. So I need to play that. No, not now. I don't understand why that's occurring, but I will. Just needs a little time. Okay, for now, let's stop that. In fact, I do need to see the numbers. I know what to do. I'll mute the channel. There we go. It's still doing its thing now. Yeah, I still got signal. Let's try and figure out why that's done what it's done. I jump into the input. That's why. So hopefully that should be sorted now. Ooh. Still no clear on that. Interesting. Could it be because it was always active? Yeah, okay. So there we go. Always active is effectively mono. And that it didn't like that with the pitch at all. But it's all sorted now. Managed to figure it out. So I'll stop again. Okay, so next up is the filter. You don't want it visible. We're not going to use a great filter here. If you want to use a great filter, if you're working along, then obviously you can put in whatever you'd like. But I'm going to use this Pro 52. It seems appropriate. I need terminal input. I'm going to take the audio. It goes into the filter. I need terminal output because the filter from the audio from the filter goes back out of this unit. I need to receive. Two panel it again. From the input, I go to filter. Click on send to from. That goes in there, although the cutoff range I believe is incorrect. No, that's correct. I sorted that out. terminal. Oops. I go straight into the res. Let's not do the envelope just for a second. Let's check that's working. Because I haven't connected up any of the filter envelope here. It's not connected at all. I'd have to build all that. That is technically working. Technically. Let's have a look and see what's going on. I'm going to need to change my IC sends and receives. That one bigger. That should be working now. Boo, boo, boo. Go back to the other unit. The send is going to be wrong. That sends out 39, getting 127. Let's make that always active. There we go. That's working where I want it to work. I don't need that to be visible. And I don't need that to be visible. So that's the basic synthesizer. Connection of the second amp and the second envelope, I'm going to leave up to you. I think I've given you enough to show you how that will work. We're going to jump back in next time and do some more complicated routing. For the now, the last thing I'm going to show you is the importance of saving. Okay, so see that red thing? It's saying, you haven't saved this ensemble, you haven't saved this ensemble. And if you don't save the ensemble, the next time you load up your sequencer, it won't have saved this content for you. So you need to save it manually. So file, save ensemble as. I don't want to save it there. I'll save it in my documents. Boom, 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 boom. New folder. I'll call this Reaktor 6. Oh, very helpful. 6 ensembles. And I'll call this synth 101. Makes sense to me. Save. Okay, and that's gone. This is now saved structure. We've got to remember to save it. I wonder if there's an auto save. I can't remember. Probably. Anyhow, this is saved. So we'll call it a day there until next time. In the meantime, if you're following along, what I'm going to do between now and the next lesson is rename these properly, connect in oscillator 2, connect in the filter modulation, so another envelope, and have a think about how we're going to do the connection between basically getting these sync pins to work in oscillator 1 and the input we're going to need to take from them from oscillator 2. You can also have a go at putting it in the mixer if you like. That's not very difficult. and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.